is I'll have to work on it this weekend, getting all these out of YouTube, getting them published out there. So it'll take a while for them to run. It's a lot of stuff here, a lot of meat on the bone. So, okay, great. Well, where we left off is we talked about what kind of patterns your organization can support. And so we gave some examples of some discipline agile patterns. We've talked about extreme programming, Scrum, and so on and so forth. My recommendation is just start with the patterns you already have and then branch off from there. If you're already traditional, maybe think about iterative sorts of approaches as opposed to something pure Scrum, right? And then work with that and mature the organization within those concepts and primarily the PMs. Help the PMs understand how to plan and run something other than just a straight, waterfall sort of thing all the way through. And then work from that to start adding additional patterns as need be. But what we're beginning to really drive into as we get more into practical exercise is this idea of complexity. So we know as project managers, we live in a world of complexity. We have complexity that comes from all kinds of different places and aspects. So what I'd like to do is kind of take us down this road of complexity, and through this, work with you on a technique that I've used to some degree of success in helping to really understand the complexity of what we're trying to accomplish. So what is complexity driven by? Complexity is driven by dependencies. For one, the number of sequential actions, the number of things that have to occur relative to each other. It'd be great if we could just run everything in parallel, right? That would be wonderful. However, if I order equipment, then I will receive equipment. If I receive equipment before ordering, that would be kind of weird. That would be kind of odd, right? We have to order before we receive it. So that is an example of a straight up dependency that has to be followed through on. And we can scale that up through all the different dependencies. Like we've got to have customer buy-in before we can deploy. Well, that adds complexity to what we're doing. The interactions that occur. And I use the communication channel formula quite a bit in my thinking, if not actual calculations. And so the communication channel formula is the number of people or systems or objects involved times that number minus 1 divided by 2. Okay, so right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people involved, right? So 7 times 6 divided by 2 is 21 interactions. And then adding additional people here would increase the number of interactions by kind of a aggregate curve, so to speak. Okay. Another thing that drives complexity is skill sets and experiences, which leads to understanding or misunderstanding. The less skill set, the less experiences we have, the more complex it's going to feel to us. What's interesting is that the more complex the problem, the more effort needs to be put into understanding the problem so that it can be solved. That is that upfront planning perspective. And our upfront planning is all about managing the complexity. So if we think about those 4 patterns, the agile life cycle, the lean life cycle, continuous delivery agile, continuous delivery lean, we would have had to have worked the complexity out quite a bit if we were to get to the continuous delivery lean. Now, there are those within the agile community who say that's nirvana, right? That is, if you're true, pure agile, that's where you want to be, in that continuous delivery lean sort of loop, as it were. Life isn't like that because there's some complexity we just can't work out. Okay. What that does, though, is it leads to rise in process. So the more complex the situation, the more we want to apply some sort of process or tool or technique to it. But that dilemma that creates is that complexity can be deceiving. As humans, we tend to overcomplicate things that are inherently simple. Right? Have you ever done that? It's like, let me look at this. I'm not sure it could be that simple. Occam's razor, the simplest answer is the most likely answer. Oversimplify things that are inherently complex. Oh, it's just SAP. What could be the problem? Right? It's just Axon. And we hear this all the time from our customers, right? Well, they already have a software package. What's the problem? Just implement it, right? Well, what is really driving the complexity? So in terms of that, in order to identify the pattern that would be appropriate, we want to determine the complexity involved. And so what I typically do is look for dependencies, the technical dependencies, functional dependencies, and resource dependencies. And then remove those dependencies where possible because of that small batch, large batch dilemma. As much as we can remove dependencies, we're going to work those things through. And we're going to strive to package up the smallest, simplest set of value and then build on that. And this is also within the project construct. So where do we look for those dependencies? We look in the interactions, the organizational, the individual availability, and look for understanding, experiences, skill sets, training, and so on and so forth. So look for the interactions, look for the understanding, levels of understanding, look for the simplest, smallest set of value. You guys ready to try something? So let me give you a minute to read this scenario, okay? And what I'm going to ask after this is how many functional dependencies you can identify, how many technical dependencies, and how many organizational dependencies. Okay? How many functional dependencies, how many organizational dependencies, how many technical dependencies can you identify? All right. So I'll let you guys continue to work on that, and we can come back to this slide. But let me just start with the functional dependencies. How many functional dependencies do you see in delivering the objective here?
It's like one main functional objective, getting the chat app to integrate with MS Teams.
Okay. So when I say functional dependencies, what are the functions we have to perform in order to deliver this, right? So I see 4. I see that we're going to have to understand requirements. I don't know that design is necessarily going to be that important because these are existing systems that we're simply providing connection to. So we can actually, maybe even in development, if we were organized as such, we could even do test first development.
And do you use the old deployment tool, or is it available for use to the new deployment?
Yeah, that's an assumption that I would make.
Okay.
That we don't have to implement some new deployment tool.
I have a feeling Brandon and I have a definition problem here because when I heard functional, I heard features, right?
So I was thinking like the requirements.
That's what I heard too.
Okay.
I didn't hear when I'm looking at what you have here, Dan, I have that under organizational.
Okay. So I'm going to separate functional and organizational in this way because I'm coming at it from the project perspective. What are the functions of the project that we're going to have to? And maybe I'll come up with a better word. Like I said, this is a pilot. This material, so I'll take your feedback. John, you got notes? So there's essentially just 4 steps within the project, right? That we get the requirements, develop, test, and deploy. That's really those are the major work items, so to speak. Okay? So if I were to run that interaction or the relationship formula, right, that's 6 interactions, right? 4 times 4 minus 1 divided by 2. In other words, it's a fairly simple project. Correct? So far. But this is not unusual, right? Because the project management piece of it is the easiest piece, right?
Right.
Well, until we get to the next one, the technical dependencies. What do we see here? I see the mobile app, I see MS Teams, I see the deployment platform, but I also see phones, and not just phones, but 2 types of phones.
The versions.
Okay.
Right. Apple and Android, and then,
Bring your own device.
Yeah, bring your own device, right? So with that, I'll just go ahead and say 5. So we have 10 interactions there, right? And the interactions there, some might accuse me and even kick me in the shin of misapplying a formula because it's intended to be communication channels, right? But there's interactions, and this is a way of me gauging where the complexity might actually lie. Because complexity...
Dan,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just have to ask this. Wouldn't you also add the end user to this and their level of ability to operate their phones or make changes to their phones?
You may see that next on the organizational dependencies.
Fair enough.
Because this is just the technical component. Keeping in mind what I'm trying to understand here is where is complexity? Because complexity is going to be in those dependencies, the understandings, and things like that. Now, in my scenario that I described, the mobile app has been out there for how long? It was 3 years?
2 or 3 years, it said.
Yeah, 3 years. So there's no question about how to use the mobile app. Okay. MS Teams, is that pretty solid technically? Does Teams work on Apple? Unfortunately, quite well. Because I keep getting Teams calls on my phone. John, did you have...
Well, I was just saying it doesn't quite work as well on the MacBook, or the Mac desktop as it does on Windows. But yeah, I'll accept it works well.
It works on the phone just quite well. So apparently it's a problem with your MacBook. The Android, I don't have Android anything, but
Well, that sounds a lot like Microsoft would say, by the way.
I'm a shameless apologist. That's it. When you said you worked with North Dakota, I had to think you were probably working with actually Great Plains.
Yeah, Microsoft had acquired Great Plains. I think somewhere.
So
I can't remember when. 2008.
Yeah, that became the foundation of the Microsoft Dynamics financial system.
Yeah, the whole Microsoft Business Services division is out there. So they got Dynamics, AX, all those products.
Yeah. So,
nice campus.
Shameless Microsoft apologist. I don't even have Google installed on any of my devices. Like Chrome doesn't touch.
I look behind the curtain long enough. I'm not so Microsoft.
All right. Let's talk about the organizational dependencies. This is what I came up with, the organizational dependencies. So the business team are the voice of the customer, right? The development team, the QA team, the infrastructure team, the HR team. Why would the HR team be involved? It's a BYOD policy, right? Who sets those policies?
Cell phone. Yeah.
Right? And of course, the PM team, right? We're all going to be involved with this. So where are the dependencies? I mean, the complexity is really driven by the fact that you have all of these different skill sets and representatives of experiences in different silos. And this is what we feel as pain as project managers all the time. So when we talk about removing dependencies, how could we remove these dependencies?
Well, the top 4 organizational teams each work 2 and 2. So if there was a way to, right, they're split in the
if we organize this as one team, where you have the focus and attention of the team members collaborating and working together in a co-located sort of mentality. Now, granted, virtual setting, co-location in the virtual setting is really the same thing. In other words, that team is brought together as one unit. You've essentially removed those dependencies because you allow the interactions to flow without any organizational barriers. Okay? So
Dan, that goes back to something you said on day one, right? Where you mentioned bringing folks out of their organizations, out of their silos, and putting them, backfilling them wherever they came from, and putting the team together, virtually or physically, however that works. But it gets you away from having to manage 2 sets of priorities. One, your organizational, your operational priorities that I have to do on a daily basis, and my project duties.
We're going to talk a lot more about this next week on aligning the resources to the value streams. But as we said, with the value stream, the communication flows along the value stream. The organization is typically structured by skill set.
Jamie, this is your Devin Hannes problem.
Right.
I'm taking notes.
So if you were able to, and this is all part of negotiation with the resource managers for these resources, right? So there may be only a partial allocation, but it also goes back, Dusty, to authority. How much authority are we going to allow the project manager to have within the team? How much authority we're going to allow them to say, this 25%, 10 hours a week, is dedicated to this project, and as a project manager, we are helping to manage the flow of work that you are working on for those 10 hours. Okay? We get in our own way a lot. Organizations that have these cross-functional T-shaped, sort of teams are much, much more successful than those that aren't. I would venture to guess that 60% say they're not getting any value from Scrum. It's because they've never built teams. So, all that to illustrate a point. So, next, what I would like to do is I'm just going to go to the whiteboard, because there's some parts of this that conceptually that I would like to drop on the whiteboard, and because frankly I haven't really figured out a way to put it all in PowerPoint with animation and stuff like that. Maybe one day I'll get smarter and do that. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera so you don't, because I'm going to lean over here to my surface, and that way you don't have to look at the the forehead as much. So what I would like to introduce is the idea of a project canvas. A project canvas is a single view of key information of your project that you can use as a portfolio to convey what's important, but also to establish a high-level plan. Okay. Now, we talked about the MMP, MVP, MBI. It all starts with OKRs, right? But the question then becomes, how do we even find or describe OKRs that we can commit to? Okay. So in my mind, that starts with, let's see how this pen works here. And by the way, my penmanship on this whiteboard is horrible. So just bear with me. So what I typically look at are three things that I'm just going to put into a Venn diagram. Okay? That's all right. Okay? And these three things are resources, it is needs, and it is skills. Or let me use a different term. It says capabilities. Okay. And for some reason, there we go. It is not catching up with me. So if I have resources that I can apply, those resources have the capabilities to meet a need, then I'm at this intersection, right, of all three. And I can go ahead and write out, I'll just call this one number 1. This is the place where I can write up OKRs. I can write up an objective key result and have a reasonable expectation that those can be met, because I have as in my Venn, I have all three of those together. Okay. Where I have needs without the resource, or with the resources, but we don't have the capability, we'll call that training. Now, when I say we have the need and the resources without the capabilities, this could be technical, could be delivery system, patterns, whatever the case may be. That's what I'm going to have to fill with training. I'm going to have to invest in that so that we build those capabilities. Now, most organizations have these, right? Where I have needs and capabilities without resources, then we are going to go procure. Okay. Now, and I'm going to change this term here from training to practice. Training may precede it, but we can't really get the Oh my goodness. Don't do this to me. My whiteboard just blitzed out. Did you all see that?
Yeah, Microsoft.
Stop laughing, John.
Well, I had to work on that product.
I think that I may have overloaded my memory here. Oh my word. Let's try it again. It may be also because I use the whiteboard quite a bit and I have all kinds of things in here. Let's give it a minute to come back up. You know what? Let me just kill this. Bring it back up again. Start it from scratch. My internal fan on this thing is going crazy right now, so I may be extending the memory. Sounds like a reason to go get a new Surface. I apologize for this. So if you think about the visualization, is a whiteboard is launching again here. So I've got the needs, the resources, and the capabilities. When I say needs, by the way, what I mean by that is requirements. Things that has been given to us as needs of the organization. Okay, so as we're interacting with our customers, they are giving us all the things that they think that we need. There we go. Let's try this again. Drag this over here. Okay. And I'm going to use the term practice in order to gain those capabilities. Because even if we get the training, until we apply the training, we're still not going to know necessarily. We still don't have that confidence that we can do those, right? So it really starts with training. With the number 4, that is where we have resources and we have capabilities, but we don't have needs. So I'll call that patience. You can think of this as something we have on the bench that we can apply when needed in order to affect a situation or whatever. We're looking for the right timing, in other words. Okay? So this is kind of messy, and this is why I've had a hard time figuring out how to put this into PowerPoint. But when I think about the assets and how we apply assets to needs, at the portfolio level or at the program level, I'm thinking about, what do we have on the bench in terms of capabilities that we can apply when needed? What are we going to have to go procure? What is the team going to have to get up to speed on? But where I have that nice mix of resource availability, the need is there, especially the priority need, along with the capability to deliver, then we can go ahead and write our OKRs. Okay? So let's go from there then into the project canvas. So and that, may be as simple as a whiteboard exercise for you. But once you have that, then you can start developing what we call the project canvas. And what the project canvas is, it's the ability to understand your customer and your project, to get organized for successful initial customer call or customer discussion, to be able to launch your project with your team, but also start setting expectations on what we will need to accomplish for our deliverables. The tool is called the Project Canvas. So, first of all, in terms of understanding your client and project, what is a project canvas? First of all, it's following a lean approach. We want to visualize the work. So it's a visual representation of high-level information about the project. Really what it is a series of lists. Then that series of lists is going to help you organize the deliverables, the team, and other key information. It forms a list of achievable objectives that the PM can start confidently planning in detail. And what I mean by that is that really that sweet spot, those OKRs, we're going to start filling out the rest of the canvas with those things that we have OKRs on, but also we've left a place that you'll see here in a bit for those things that we procure, we practice, or that we have patience for. Okay? Now, if you were to go out to the internet, which we know is the source of all truth in the world, right? And you were to talk or go find a project canvas, which you can search for. I was always struck by the fact that they're just flattened out versions of project charters. Okay, it's just a bunch of stuff that it would be tucked away at the beginning of a project and never worked with. Okay, but with this, in that section at the top middle, instead we are going to work with the OKRs. Everything starts with your OKRs. And I've given you an example here of a couple of objectives that you might come up with the scenario I just provided. Okay? We want to use organizational tools for messaging, and we want to maintain control over our organizational content. As security would like to say, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in chatting between people on phones that we don't have that we don't have control over. Maybe customer interactions, things that we need to know, and so on and so forth. So that's really what one of the primary objectives are. The key results would be to successfully deploy the change in 3 months, 100% adoption of messaging through MS Teams within 6 months of deployment. And again, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. And Laz, as I mentioned, this is where we do have some time-bound SMART goals so that we're not stupid, right? So objectives, statements of what we are trying to achieve. The key results include the tangible benefits and the intangible benefits, right? Next is what I would call the resources section. So we just simply think of it in terms of roles and responsibilities. So that forms that resources part of the Venn diagram, right? What role, the contribution that's needed. Responsibility is the actual work to be done. Are there any tools that will be required? Are there any other items at our disposal, things we can use? So just list those things out. And again, this is not the same thing as a project charter, right? You may say on the project charter, we have the project organization, the project team defined, and so on and so forth. We may or may not have names to the roles when we need to do our initial planning. And certainly at the portfolio level or program level, there's a high probability you won't have names to the roles because you want that done once the project is initialized. So that's why at that program level, we're looking at just the list of the resources. And is there a timeline the customer requires? We call that a resource, but what it is a resource constraint. Okay. Next, we'll take a look at the capabilities section. Now, we'll learn about those capabilities by interacting as a team. So in my scenario, we can make we made the assumption, I should say, that within the mobility app team, there's a lot of capability there. But I would want to describe those in greater detail in terms of what technical skills, competencies, where there's overlapping, as well as where there's gaps. Where there's overlapping, we have that good T-shaped individual structurally and so on and so forth. Where there's gaps, that's going to lead us to our understanding of what resources we may not have, right? As well as capabilities. We want to make sure we also include the teaming and collaboration skills as well, but also technological capabilities, what's available and what is not available. Anything else that's required of me or the team or something of that nature. Okay. Next, then, is what we call the deliverables. So these would be your MBIs, your MVPs, MMPs, or whatever the case may be. But because at the top, you have essentially those three sections, right? The capabilities, the resources, the needs, as expressed in OKRs, where we have that good solid mix of the three. We can now start discretely describing the high-level deliverables at the program level of what we want to achieve. Later on, because we understand the outcome that the client wants, we can then start describing how we want to deliver those. So because they're MMPs, MVPs, MBIs in that way of thinking, we can then start assigning the patterns that we want to approach those with, either in groups or individually. Okay, that's where the tie-in comes in to play, so that now you're starting to make those choices on how you're going to deliver and how that eventually will be governed. You know, what are we going to hold in our hand when we're done? And what value are we going to achieve? Lastly, in terms of the practice list, these are deliverables where we have resources, but for which we lack the capabilities. The procure list. Sorry, I don't have these all. I made some adjustments early this morning into this, so I don't have this animation working exactly like I would have hoped. But the patients list, capabilities, or resources have for which we haven't yet identified a customer need. Okay, so why do you think that patients list might be important, even within the context of the mobile app? Where we can describe a capability that we currently don't need to deliver the mobile app, but we want to keep it visible and continue to make ourselves aware that that capability exists. Why would we want to do that in the value-driven PMO? Yes, if you're talking, I think you might be on mute.
That's when I read. Oh, is it because we at some point we know we're going to need those resources? We have to forecast for them?
Well, and it's not so much resources as much as capabilities.
Right.
But if we're in the mindset that we're going to adapt as we go, we keep those visible so that we know when the question arises whether or not we have the capability to fulfill it, because something always comes up, right? And so that helps you to spin up, some other sort of effort, maybe some other MBI, MVP, and so on and so forth. If you don't have the capability, then you can't commit to it. Now, you may call it something else other than patience. I like patience because I'm looking for timing, right? So again, this is very much not a flattened out project chart. That's not the intent at all. It's intended to be a visual guide that you would include as an information radiator that you would continuously have up in your projects to be able to show what you're about and keep that visible. The team members. Once we do have the team member names, a list of people that can influence success or failure, impacted by deliverables, involved in delivery, it's going to form our communication plan. And the last one is questions to answer. These are unknowns. This is essentially where your risks go. Okay, those things that we don't currently have answers to. So your practice list and your unknowns are visible, because, so your patience list and your unknowns are available. Risks captured when your team answers with "I don't know." It's a dynamic list. Go get the answers. Okay. So this is what the project canvas would look like in the way that we're proposing. Okay. Project name: Lockpick Tech. Company name is Knock Knock. Sponsor is I Want It Now. And the project manager, that would be me. So it's just a food for thought, I guess, Dusty, as we, and Laz and Dan and Brandon and Jamie, as you're going through organizing your thoughts around projects, or not even projects, but an initiative of some sort. As we think about the MVP, the MMP, and the MBI, and how we would organize things to be able to hand off to a team to start doing some detailed planning to make sure you can make those OKRs a reality. Okay. What are your thoughts on this?
Trying to separate this from kind of organizational resource capacity planning, as far as how many bodies do we have with what skill sets, what are they working on, how much bandwidth or capacity do they have available, when can we allocate them to upcoming initiatives and upcoming projects. We have no idea. Because we don't know when some of our new work is going to land. So a lot of what we have to do is reactionary from my standpoint. Laz might feel differently about this because he's a lot closer to where those resources are. And I'm talking about technical resources, but I'm also talking about a lot of what Brandon had to deal with and what Jamie's going to be dealing with, what I've been dealing with before, is the availability of the people that, your customers, your client, the people who are a part of the project team that are also part of the business, right? Because remember, we have vendors coming in saying, we're going to do a lot of the technical work for you. I need operational people to give me requirements. I need operational people to test what we build. I need operational people to do X, Y, and Z. And then we also use technical skill sets to set up infrastructure, build integrations with our legacy systems, and et cetera. But I mean, our resourcing problem is big and it's dynamic. And a lot of the times we don't, we get commitments, right? Well, you can have this attorney for 20% of the week to work on the project. Well, in reality, that 20% is actually 5. because they got dockets, they got trials, they got stuff that comes up. So we're always sort of behind the ball. Laz has a completely different set of problems where he's got people he's trying to split in half to support operations, but also support projects. So, it's always been one of those things that come into the city that was really hard for me to understand is we don't have a better resource capacity planning or forecasting tool, model, mindset. I mean, not only just when a project comes up, it's just forecasting down the road. And I think, it's part of just, we've been reactionary for so long because it's the world we live in, that's kind of where we stay.
So that's good. It's a really good point because this sort of project canvas implies that you have a database of resource allocation you can pull from to figure that out, right? Which is the problem that you're just describing. You don't have that.
I don't have that.
What I can tell you is that everybody that I have worked with and John has worked with as well, I believe, resource allocation and resource planning is the toughest nut to crack.
Well, it was, when we implemented Clarity at Expedia, it was, they created resource management roles, and that's what they did. They just managed resources, right? We went through and we did skill set inventories. What skill sets do they have? With us as a city, that's a little more difficult to do because then you start talking about bargaining units and unions and different weird things that get involved with the private sector. You don't care. You just tell me what skills you have. I'm going to plug into the application, and that application is going to tell me based on the projects that are coming up when we're going to need you, right? And then we can work out the conflicts from there. But yeah, I mean, I guess its assumption there is that we have that sort of underpinning of understanding of how many resources we have and how much of what skill set we have and what they're working on and when they're going to be available. That's probably an opportunity for us to work on as an organization.
So let's use. Go ahead, Les. I'm sorry.
And the challenge that I'm facing now as the department director is that I'm trying to shift the culture of the department from operational, day-to-day type of delivery to delivery of project in an organized and disciplined fashion. And my goal with this training, stated by Dusty very clearly, is to help develop the attendees, and some of the managers have been sick and they have not been able to attend, to help provide to them a myriad of tools that are available to handle the projects, and more importantly, to handle their portfolio. So as I go by and review all this, you're asking what is your feedback about this. I believe this is a very useful tool. And I believe at some point in time in the future, it will be used by some of our more mature leaders. I believe that as of right now, they won't be able to complete all the areas that this tool provides, but they will be able to complete a good chunk of them with a decent level of quality. But before I get to there, I need to get them to an understanding of the standards that we follow for executing projects with all the tools, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you brought up the subject of standards. So again, what we're proposing is standard by pattern, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Yes.
So yes. Dusty, let me, based upon your understanding of Clarity, when in order to get a full loaded resource view of the entire enterprise, could you put that into Clarity? Like everything going on in the enterprise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can put in. You can put projects, non-projects. You can even put servers or applications that folks are spending time to assets, yes, to support, right? So Silas manages 5 servers, and it takes him 10 hours a week. Boom, you plug that in, and then it craps out on the other side, based on whether he's working on project or non-project work. At the end of the day, when is he available to take on, when's he available, basically, and then that gets stacked up against as you're putting your projects in, and you're not putting named resources in on what you need on the project, but you're putting roles, right? I need a C++ developer. I need a server person. I need a network person. And so those two things come together, and it starts to give you that view into, well, we could do this in third quarter based on when these skill sets are available. So it gives you more insight, and it brings your project demand and your resource capacity together, and gives you a much. That is a very mature. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that took a hell of a lot of work to make work. And it requires the project managers to do their job, the resource managers to do their job, and the people who are actually working on the project and the non-project work to do their job. Because guess what? They have to put their time into the system.
Exactly.
To show where their time is actually going to, because then it gives you actual versus plan, right? So it is a real, I don't know, I've never implemented an ERP, but I want to talk about a disruptive project.
Yeah, it's huge. So the 3 PMOs that I've been associated with or worked for or whatever that were disbanded, one of the common denominators was that all 3 of them attempted to put in a project management enterprise tool.
Which is the reason why I haven't. And so we have discussed a project portfolio management tool as of significant value. My department is not ready for that.
Yeah.
We are using a SharePoint list with a portfolio, and we are beginning to move forward with some basic understanding of portfolio. And I can tell you right now that there was a cultural audit a few years ago where staff expressively asked not to be required to enter time on their day-to-day system support service request or on any project work. They do not want to enter the time, and leadership at the highest level said, that's fine, don't enter it.
So it always comes down to time entry. And so anyway, so we're, just so you know, and I don't know, this is not a shameless plug or anything like that, but the webinars that I've been given that John took over for yesterday are sponsored by Sciforma. And Sciforma is a PPM tool. Sciforma is the only tool that I've seen that does this well, when you can actually have multiple patterns, because what you run into is, like, you have to do one or the other. So like in a Clarity or something like that, you're going to do a work breakdown structure activities, and you have to determine what level people enter their time. And if it's at the activity level, they're going to have a timesheet of like 50 things, right? And then they start barking, and then management says, no, that's too much overhead. Let's move that up a level. And then it loses its granularity, and you lose your progress, and then you have all kinds of problems, right? But likewise, on the operations side, you can't validate that there's actually value for their time, right? Because they're just giving all their time against a single line item that says, I was on operations and support this week, right? And of course, it adds up to 40 hours. So what this tool does is it does allow for time reporting at that MMP, MVP, MBI level, so that you're not down in the granular sort of thing, but you can associate the cost of that MBI, so that then you can compare that to the benefit you receive. And so that's why I went into partnership with them to share these sorts of things within that context. But and again, this is not about the tool, because if you're dysfunctional, the tool is only going to amplify the dysfunction. But if you, but I would say, what I would say is this is, with a few kind of coaching sessions, this is actually for your business analyst leads, project managers and things like that. This is something to get them to thinking about what it is that we can and can't do, and get them to the point where they feel comfortable in what they're committing to, or articulate why they can't commit to something. So I think, Laz, your team may not be as far off there as you might think. With just a couple hours of coaching or something of that nature in here, to at least, because it's about the interactions in the entire. I understand the SharePoint list thing, but also I do have some spreadsheet tools, Excel-based tools that I've used at the portfolio level that helps me to understand where the demand is coming from, and then at the aggregate level show what value we've received for the effort put in, if not at the granular level. Because as soon as you get to in order to get it at the granular level, you have to get them to enter time card information on 10, 20, 30 work items a week. It falls apart pretty quick. So
the decision that I've made right now is that I will only ask all the department teams to log time for project-related tasks, not for day-to-day system support. And I will only ask them to log the time if my leadership has questions about the time utilization of that particular team.
yeah,
So I'm navigating all the political complexity. I am understanding what we need to get, but I'm navigating all the political complexities of getting there through the process of the challenges the organization has.
yeah.
As a result, I'm saying we're only tracking time on project work, and only if our leadership has questions about the time utilization of your particular unit.
Yeah.
If they don't, then you don't need to track the time.
Yeah, I would say time tracking is when you're driving the Ferrari. that's the level of maturity that time tracking requires. But then they'll say, well, we don't want to track time in that way. And then they'll ask you all kinds of questions. How do you know they're working on the right thing?
Absolutely. And that's the dilemma, right? So as of right now, what I'm telling my leadership is, if you want this to be done, this is the minimum level of tracking that I need in order to lead the department. Are you willing to support that? Yes? Then we go. Oh, I have questions about that. Well, then you're not getting these other things you're asking for. That's the level of detail in which I am today.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're actually at time for today. Was that helpful though? I'm seeing kind of a tepid sort of response.
No, it just it brings up a lot of.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It brings up a lot of. Just a lot of thoughts and things. I like the Venn diagram. There's a lot of tools here, and part of me is that's one of the first things I want to do is implement a PPM tool across the city. And I over the years I realized that I just quit talking about it. Right? It's not going to happen. We do not understand portfolio management. We do not understand planning. We do not understand any of the things that it requires from the top down or the bottom up to make something like that successful. And having